people who research it have all these changes in their life. And that's why I'd say aligns with near-death experiencers in terms of how I've changed. Plus, just the feeling that others are still with me and that there's so much more to this world than just our physical life here. And that really has brought a level of joy to my life.
Thank you, Liz, for giving us a chance to speak to you today. So Liz is a logical atheist who started exploring the afterlife after her dad passed on. She wrote 2 books about her journey, which you can actually see on the background, and I'll link in the description below, and is today the host of the WTF Just Happened podcast. So like myself, if I understand correctly, you're not an experiencer, but you've clearly researched NDEs and other paranormal phenomena for quite some time now. So the reason I wanted to have you on our show is to find out how all this research has affected the way that you look at life these days. But before we start, I was curious to know, what were you doing before all this?
Ugh, pretty normal life. I had a startup in the fashion industry that sold emerging designers from around the world. I was assisting fashion stylists and styling on my own. I was consulting with other startups in other areas, other fashion startups, some in finance, some in crypto. I just loved kind of companies at the early stage and the creative strategy. So I was doing a lot of consulting for a lot of early stage startups. Pretty normal life, living in New York, out of college a few years, trying to get my life together.
So I take it the trigger for you really was your dad passing. That's what set everything in motion. Is that correct?
100%. This would not have been on my radar even without his passing. That kind of really shook up my life at that point.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. So one of my focuses of research is on the after effects for those who did not have a direct experience, but for those maybe like yourself and I that have studied these topics long enough. So I'd be curious to know, if you have encountered any changes in the way that you live your life these days after all the years of research.
Oh my God, that's an understatement. So different. It's funny. I remember very early on reading an article, I believe it might have been by Dr. Bruce Greyson, about how near-death experiencers have all these changes in their life. And interestingly, while it's slower, um, ex- people who research it have all these changes in their life. So I was like, yeah, that makes no sense. And here it is. I mean, I don't have the level of after effects of affecting electronics, but my career has changed. I feel, and this could also be the result of a loss, but I feel like, and just, time going on and experiencing more, but there's just a much different approach to how I view people, how I view situations. I feel I have more of like a broader understanding. I mean, I'm still get very devastated by horrible things happening in the world, but I have a secondary viewpoint as well that I don't think I would have before.
No.
I have a much like deeper view of my career. I mean, before it was always find something I find really fun and really care about, focus on making a lot of money too. And now I'm not gonna lie, I haven't gotten over caring about money, definitely. But and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing,
Of
but
course.
I feel everything I have to do has to have a bigger purpose outside of myself. And that's something that is absolutely a priority to my career. Whereas before, I thought I felt that. I was like, oh, I love fashion, I love art, and I still do. But it's about like it's much more about not just like, is it interesting on a level of like, oh, I appreciate it. I mean, it's just deeper. It's about what impact am I having to make the world a much better place for everyone else? And that just goes into everything I feel. And,
Yeah.
and that's why I'd say aligns with near death experiencers in terms of how I've changed. Plus, just the feeling that others are still with me and that there's so much more to this world than just our physical life here. And that really has brought a level of joy to my life.
That's great. No, that makes perfect sense. So the next question is probably going to sound a little obvious by now, but are
Right.
you afraid of death these days?
It's so interesting because big picture, not at all. Um, like I used to be haunted. I mean, it might be one of the reasons I never even let myself think about it was just too sad and too scary. I assumed that was it. I had no reason to think otherwise, so I just avoided thinking about it. That's gone. Big picture, no fear of it. Instinctively, I have the same level of reactive fear that I always have. Like really bad turbulence, I react intellectually, I'm not scared, but my body reacts with just as much fear as always, If I see a car coming at me or like a car stops in front of me if I'm driving when I'm in LA, it's like all the same instinctive survival fears kick in that always have, if that makes sense.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Well, so what's interesting about your case is that obviously, as we mentioned, your trigger was the loss of a loved one. So I'm not going to expect you to summarize your books into the time that we have available today. But do you have any advice for those going through the loss of a loved one?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, first of all, take this with a grain of salt. This might work for you and it might not, because that actually ties into my advice. Everyone comes out of the woodworks telling you, you need to, you have to. And, I mean, I'm in the United States, so maybe it's different depending where you live, but our culture here is terrible about grief and emotions and death. So let yourself feel whatever you feel. Like there's no right or wrong way. And you might handle it completely differently from other family members and others affected by that loss or others who've had the same loss within their family. Like other people I know lost their dad. I handled it so differently and some of them were very corrective of how I was handling it. But I was like, this works for me, that worked for you. Um, you know, if you think an afterlife is highly unlikely or impossible, you know, th- do read the research. There's science. You don't have to have faith. It's not based on belief. There's really tangible research that has nothing to do with woo. So I don't know how many people here are listening in early deep grief with just any hope they could want to hold on to, but the evidence is so strong and it's data based and data driven, done by intelligent people. So that was huge for me too.
No, makes perfect sense. So here's a question for the skeptical people out there. So to anyone that perhaps have not had a direct experience or they're still at the early ages of their exploration, is there anything that you recommend them to do to perhaps come to terms with the notion of an afterlife?
I'm going to start with the research. IANDS, I mean, there's Dr. Bruce Greyson, Dr. Melvin Morse, Dr. Dan Hennessy Powell. I mean, I know she's not directly IANDS, but she was at the last conference. I mean, those are just three out of I don't know how many. Look into the history of the Society for Cyclical Research. Look at the Windbridge Institute, where Dr. Julie Beischel is conducting up to quintuple blinded studies on psychic mediums. I mean, there's just volumes. You could take a year, read 10 hours a day, and you wouldn't read or watch all of it. I mean, what other institutions? IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences, the Rhine Education Center does classes. People who've worked with Stephen Hawking have researched this, who are Sir Roger Penrose and Dr. Stuart Hameroff, and maybe change the question. Like, I think the question people feel that's always brought into our society, it's like, is there heaven or do you just die and that's it? There isn't any heaven is irrelevant. That's not the question. The question is consciousness created by a brain or downloaded by a brain? And it doesn't, I get it. It doesn't make sense that it would be downloaded by a brain, but it doesn't make sense that it'd be created by a brain either. Like consciousness of the level of complexity does not make sense. So which one is there more evidence for?
Yeah.
And also get your own medium readings. Use really strict protocols. Hide all of your identity, your name. You can do phone on a Google Voice. You don't even have to do video. Now that when I was starting my research, facial recognition technology wasn't so big. It's gotten bigger. So if that's a concern, phone, Google Voice, have a friend pay, fake name. And good mediums will respect if that's what you need to do. If they find out during the reading that's not your real name, like that's fine.
Absolutely. What would you say is the biggest lesson that you learned from all these findings?
I mean, the most important to me is that this isn't it. I'd say I'm 95, maybe at this point, like 98% convinced we continue surviving. I mean, that's just the biggest thing. This is the world's biggest life question. So, n- I mean, and that just has so many layers to it. It changes my own sense of myself and my own mortality, which lifts such an existential dread. It makes me feel my loved ones are still with me and that I'll see them again, which I mean, I can't think of anything I'd want more in the whole world than that, more than the $1 trillion. If I had $1 trillion, sure, I'd love that. I'd also do kind things and change the world, not destroy it the way some people with that kind of money are. But we'll leave that there. But I can't even quite put into words. It's just the most life changing, meaningful, profound thing to go from thinking that this is it, my only life, and you die, you die. I'll never see my loved ones again. And living with that as sort of a chronic anxiety to
Yeah.
knowing there's more. And it's also just curiosity is, I think, the thing I always turn to, I've come to realize about myself. And it's also just the most fascinating science that we have access to. We can't hop on a rocket ship to another planet in another solar system that's filled with life, which I do think are out there in other solar systems. So this is the most profound science we physically have access to at this level of our human evolution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And
Yeah.
that's great. Do you have out of all the interviews that you've been carrying out so far, do you have a favorite NDE account?
Ooh, oh, I can't answer that. I mean, I'm science based. So speaking with like Dr. Jan Holden, I'm scared I'm going to leave someone out, but Dr. Bruce Greyson, Dr. Melvin Morse. I mean, always get really excited by the scientists, but the near death experiences, they're so, all of them, let's see, sorry, Reverend, I believe, Reverend Peter Panagore, Jeffrey Olson. I mean, Batty Gordango, like, I think I butchered her last name. I don't know. I just, Chase DeMaio is coming out this week. Every single one, like every single one, because at the end of the day, it's a preponderance of evidence that builds up and builds up. And here are these people, some I've met and absolutely can vouch for their normalcy and sanity and groundedness and genuineness. And some I haven't met and they come on for the podcast for the first time, but I vet people a bit and make sure they're seem, very, believable and genuine. And when I just put them all together and each one comes on grounded, honest, open-hearted, and they're sharing a very profound personal thing from their life. And, each one has a uniqueness. And then each one has common threads, such as it feels realer than real, which when I put that all together, it creates such a powerful story. Cause I think while each one by itself would just be, wow, like that's amazing. And thank you for sharing. And that's beautiful. It's something to think about. It's really when the whole body of it comes together, it gets stronger and stronger.
No, I completely agree. I think if you
Yeah.
take these stories individually, I think, yeah, they're lovely stories, but I think you mentioned earlier, so you're 98% convinced. What about the remaining 2%?
Well, I mean, how can we know 100% for sure? You can't be 100% sure about anything. Maybe we're in a simulation. As I believe Michio Kaku questions. I don't think that's the answer, but I'm would say I'm 100% convinced something operates differently than our material science would say because all the evidence is way too strong for that. But I have to be realistic that physics could come up with an answer, and the answer is not survival. So that is possible. And there could be something someone hasn't seen. I mean, science is always evolving and changing, and as we know more, so there could be some big explanation. And again, there's other weird, sort of interesting theories, again, like the simulation theory, or, you know, this is just the world's biggest question. So how can we say we know 100%?
No, no, of course, absolutely. So, do you feel perhaps that we're witnessing the beginning of a new era, one that's characterized by a shift from a material to a more spiritual society, and perhaps this could be the consequence of the advent of the field of near-death studies and some of the other approaches that seem to be all pointing in the same direction, and that they really just popped up in the last few decades.
I find that such an interesting question because we have such a distorted view of time as humans. Like, we'll say 500 years is a really long time. Or for people who believe in like God and Jesus, they'll say 2,000 years, it's been around forever. I forget how many years humans have been around, but also probably if you think eternal Big
300,000.
Bangs.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And way before that, probably if you think of the concept of eternity and eternal Big Bangs and big crunches, we've probably had other iterations of humans or very close to them. So I feel like we might feel this is what's going on, and I'm definitely a little biased in my personal perception because I'm around this, so I'm like, suddenly everyone's talking about it, but I've also written 2 books about it, so even people who might never have talked about it know about my books and wanna ask me. I mean, you look back, I forget how many years, and they believed in Zeus, and gods had the answer for everything. So in one sense, I think, in one sense, we're the least we've ever been because we have so many other options and understanding through science. Um, and in another, I think as science gets stronger and stronger, at least in this iteration of humanity, we've never had a more logical reason. I do think it seems that after traumas like pandemics and wars, if you look at the Society of Cyclical Research, I believe after the 1918 pandemic and after World War I and maybe World War II, there was kind of a big rise in the popularity of the research of like William James and Leonora Piper. And it could be a little bumped now, but you know, I would think there need in one sense, I do hear that traditional religion, organized religion, is becoming less and less popular, especially like our generation of millennials and the one below us, I almost said Gen X. Gen X is above us, Gen Z is below us. Gen Z, there's less organized religion, more focus on spirituality. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's hard to say. And the internet has also, I think, distorted things because people who are interested in maybe things that were a little more pocketed are all finding each other. And, it's a very interesting question. And I think it's more complex, but that's where I'd start with.
Yeah.
And I think it would need a lot of data and studying. And again, looking at a much bigger picture than what humans tend to do because we consider 100 years elderly when in reality that's
Absolutely.
barely a blip in anything. So
That's right.
that's my kind of long response to that.
No, it's an interesting take. It's a little different than what I normally get, but yes, I guess only time will tell, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
All right. So I have this question, which is a bit more of a curiosity. So you're aware that one of the elements of an NDE is that these people are able to sometimes meet, let's say, a guardian angel or even the creator, and they're able to ask any questions they like and be able to
Yes.
just get an instant download of the answer. So if you were in that position, what would your question be?
To a god?
Yeah.
I'd be like, "You exist? I did not see that one coming. I researched this. I still don't think so." So I would be a little shocked. Ooh, I'd have so many questions. Let's see, like, am I right? Do we survive? I guess I'm there. I'd be like, "Wow, I was right. I assessed it right." But what happens? Do we eternally does our consciousness eternally continue? What happens after the big crunch? Is there a big crunch? Are there other dimensions of consciousness? What are they like? When did humans or material conscious beings first begin? Was it in this? I assume again, many other iterations. Is there a multiverse? yeah, what happens to our individuality? Does it go on continuously? Um, how many lives does everyone live? I mean, just so many. I would torture this individual higher consciousness that some might call God for like for I don't know how long. It's just there's so much to ask. Like, did we start by accident? Was there an intention? What's going to happen? And I guess, what does time mean? What happens if we were to travel, say, if we were able to live, let's say, 1 trillion years and we were to travel close to the speed of light for 1 trillion years in one direction in a rocket ship, where would we end up? You know, a lot of that. Those are just some of the questions, and I'd probably have a ton more.
Well, so then I would be curious to know what's your idea of God these days?
I'm always a little careful saying this, I guess, because there could be some grieving people who get comfort from the concept of God. I mean, so I don't mean this disrespectfully. I'm coming as a researcher. I just think totally irrelevant. I think it's an irrelevant question. I think which I'll elaborate on more. I think it's jumping to a massive conclusion of how this all works without any evidence and over defining based on like probably how people are culturally raised. I think it's the wrong question. I think the question is consciousness created by a brain or is it downloaded by a brain? And in a download by a brain, is it continual in some form that's non-physical and not dependent on a brain? And that's what's required for an afterlife. What that consciousness is made up of, what mechanism it is, how it started. I mean, those are huge questions. I don't think we can know that yet. I have my theory of the closest to how it might work, which I'm happy to share, but question of whether there's a God, I mean, that just seems like a very, again, not for people getting comfort or love or safety. I have so much respect, but from the factual perspective, I mean, I think, what do we mean? Is it like one individual conscious being who created all of this? I've never seen any reason to think that. And I don't even know how you'd explore that. And I don't even, again, that's not even the question. There's so many possibilities for how this could work, and you've got to just explore it openly.
Understandable. But let's say, so I'm not asking Liz, the researcher now, but if we were to speculate, why do you think God made us? What's the reason for us to be on Earth?
Well, I don't think there most likely is a God. So why did we get created? Me personally. First of all, I guess with that question you're asking, if do I think one individual being created us? Probably not. No. So I don't think that's why did we come here?
Well, let me rephrase
I
that.
mean that
What's the
okay.
reason for us to have to go through this physical experience?
Yeah, I just sometimes don't know if it's a total evolutionary accident and somehow our consciousness, was just playing like some biocentrism, all these other consciousness, and we're trying different states. If they just happen, then there's all sorts of physical, non-physical states, and it's just an accident. Or I would probably more likely lean towards there is some purpose, basically because mediums and near death experiencers say it, and they know better than me because they have more direct experience. So be more scientific. It seems to be some purpose. And I do notice here that, there seems to be some way we ideally, and we don't do this all the time, but there's some drive and force to heal negative energy. Like, and again, we're not very good at this. Some of us are, some of us aren't, some are sometimes, not others. But, you know, when someone does something wrong, like our most of our intuition is to punish. But if you really and get back at and be angry, I mean, uh, I certainly fall into that a lot of the time. But if you look at things like rehabilitation programs in prison, you look at most of the prisoners who were horribly abused as children, and they seem to get better with love. If you can give them love before they grow up, people who are doing bad things end up not doing bad things. So and that's really the highest way we can be.
Yeah.
And to give love to those who are hurting. And, again, I think there are exceptions. I think there's some people who are just out to hurt, but I think that's such a tiny majority of the people who do cause pain. So it seems to be some way, maybe, of changing dark, kind of angry, and I'm not talking about like righteous anger, which is fair, like anger at the injustices against others, but like that dark, angry, wanting to hurt, whatever form that energy is, it seems to be almost like a filter of changing that into a loving, kinder, happier, caring about others energy.
That makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right. Liz, I have one last question for you. And again,
Sure.
I'm not asking Liz, the researcher, but I want to know what your gut feelings perhaps are telling you. What's the meaning of life?
Ooh, trying to figure that out for myself, for the world. I know. It's like you could probably ask me a different day. I'm going to quote my mentor, who means the world to me, Fran Ginsburg, and she passed of pancreatic cancer in 2020, and she was like a second mom, and she was so wise. She had a daughter about my age who'd passed away, which is what set her and her husband, Bob Ginsburg, the founders of Forever Family Foundation, on this. I consider her one of the smartest people I know. And when she was in that twilight stage between life and death, just as sort of a, you know, and what the, sorry, it's the weirdest. This is Fran. Hi, Fran. Should I go fix my lights? You know what? I have my space heater running. So
Yeah,
my,
I think we're gonna keep that. I think it's looking quite nice and that's some special effects. So yeah, but when do we go
all
ahead?
right. Okay. I'm running my space heater and sometimes my like lights go out. So with that, you have to fix the fuse. So we'll just keep this as some really weird stuff. Sorry. I don't know what was that. That's so funny. Okay. So, her husband Bob just sort of in a, kind of dark humor moment. The hospice nurse said, "Do you have any more questions?" He said, "Yeah. What's the meaning of life?" And Fran, barely able to still speak, said, "Oh, that's easy. It's to make the world a better place." And when I'm feeling bad or sort of giving up, I try to keep that as my motto every day in the decisions I make. And I think about her every day. So that's something I carry with me. And again, I learned so much from her. And so I think that's a lesson from her.
That's great, Liz. Are there any party messages you would like to leave the audience with today?
I mean, don't leave your space heater running. Bring a podcast with video. Um, And I think, again, I don't know how many of you are skeptical and in grief, but I really go back to this is something I often go back to is that the question really is consciousness created by a brain or downloaded by a brain? And when I'm just like, where could consciousness survive? Survival makes no sense. Um, I always remind myself that like neither makes sense. They are equally so weird. So which one has more evidence for it? Not which one seems logical while we're in our material brains, which one has more evidence? Because it makes no sense either that mass, matter, non-conscious materials that create our brain would create consciousness as it is. We're not just here trying to eat, reproduce, survive. We have like love and emotions and philosophy and this really complex experience. And so neither makes sense. So look which one has more evidence. And if you are in grief, terminal yourself, just existential dread, hopefully that helps. And hopefully my saying this now there you go. It's just sort of done. Is that a WTF or is that just like a normal, I had too many electronics running? I don't know which.
That's great, Lisa. Thank you
So
so much for the lovely conversation. Keep up the good work. I think you're doing wonderful. And yeah, wish you all the best. All the best for
you
now.
too.
All
Thank
right.
you so much. And I look forward to having you on my podcast as well.
All right. Hi there. Well, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to support the IANDS community, please leave a like, subscribe, and maybe share with the ones you love. New episodes are out each Friday. Until then, enjoy the stream we all call life and live the love you wish to see in the world. Bye for now.